it is my privilege to bring the word, to bring a message of encouragement to you today, continuing in our series, Prepare the Table. So we heard our senior minister, Pastor Andrew, sharing a little bit about what that picture is, of what the table represents. We see pictures of the table all throughout Scripture, but essentially what it is it's the place where we commune with God. It's a place that we meet with God. And this very church that you have entered is a table. This is a meeting place with the living God where we get to taste and see that He is good, where we get to experience for ourselves, not just hear about God, not just get head knowledge of who God is, but we get to experience His goodness in our lives. And the heart behind this series is that, as people who come to experience that for ourselves, that we would be ones who bring others along with us too, that we would prepare a way for others to taste and see that God is good. And that is just so wonderful. And so today I want to speak into that, how we can prepare the table through serving in the house of God. That we would be ones who have a yes in our spirit. That whatever it looks like and whatever season of life we are in, whether we are a young adult, whether we're busy mom or dad, whether we're an empty nester, whatever stage of life that we are at, and whatever it looks like, that we would be ones devoted to serving in the house of God. And that the heart behind that would be we're making a way for others to come to the table. And so I'm excited to share with you today. I better get my notes out. So today I actually want to share a little bit from the story of a man in the Old Testament. He actually doesn't have, chapters and chapters devoted to his life. There's actually only a really minor role that we see him in the book of 2 Samuel rather, and 1 Chronicles. But there is so much that we can glean from his journey into serving in the house of God that I really want to share from today, and I pray that it encourages you. So you might be wondering, who is this person? Well, his name is Obed-Edom. Obed-Edom. So Obed-Edom, he appears on the scene around the same time that David has just become the new king of Israel. And one of the first things that David decides to do as king of Israel is he wants to bring the Ark of God back into Jerusalem. And you see, the Ark of God, I don't know about you, but when I think of the Ark of God, I always think of Indiana Jones for some reason. But so there's this Ark of God, but it's not, you got to understand, it's not a religious relic or object, this Ark of God. It actually not just symbolically carried the presence of God, but literally carried the manifest presence and glory of God. There was power and the presence of God that emanated out of the Ark of God. And so I'm just giving you a little bit of context before we read about Obed-Edom. So what happened when David became king is he decides we need to bring this back into Israel, because you see it once had been in Israel, but some enemies of the nation of Israel, the Philistines, actually captured the ark and they took it away. And to cut a long story short, a whole bunch of bad things happened to the Philistines because they mishandled the ark, and they're like, oh, we don't want it anymore. We're going to send it back. Take it back. We don't want it. And so they send it back to Israel. And it ends up sitting in this guy, Abinadab. It ends up sitting in his house for 20 years, just sitting there. We don't hear anything about it, just sits there in this guy's house for 20 years. Now, fast forward to when David becomes king, he's like, we need to bring this to Jerusalem. We need to bring the ark, the presence of God, back to the city. And so he rallies all of the people of Israel to come with him to Abinadab's house. And so they take the ark and they're going to transport it back to the city. But the way that they decide to do this is they put it on like a cart that's got these oxen that are pulling it along. So that's how they decide they're going to transport the ark. Just a side note, that's a no-no. That is like something they were never meant to do. There's instructions, I think, in the book of Numbers about how the ark is to be carried. It was always meant to be carried by the priests, by people, not on an object or a thing. It was meant to be carried by the people of God, the priests of God. And yet for some bizarre reason, they decide the way they're going to bring it back is on this cart of oxen. Now something really bad and horrible happens because they do this. So as it's getting transported back to Jerusalem, everyone's praising God and worshiping, and they're all excited. But this one of the sons of Abinadab reaches out to touch the ark, and God is angry because you're not supposed to do that. And it's pretty dramatic, but he falls down dead. So hectic. Don't you just love the Old Testament? It's full of all these really hectic stories. And so, as you can imagine, everyone starts freaking out. Like, oh my gosh, this guy has just died. David included, he is freaking out. He's angry at God. He's afraid of God. And he's like, change of plans, guys, change of plans. And this is where Obed-Edom comes on the scene. In 1 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 12 to 14. It says, David was afraid of God that day and asked, how can I ever bring the ark of God to me? He did not take the ark to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of God remained with the family of Obed-Edom in his house for 3 months, and the Lord blessed his household and everything he had. What a difference, hey? Like, in one circumstance, we see someone literally die because of the power and the presence of God is just too much, and he's mishandled the presence of God. And yet, on the other hand, we see this man host the presence of God in his home, and everything is blessed. Everything is blessed. Well, what happens next? Well, eventually word gets back to King David. Everything's going well for Obed-Edom. There's blessing in his household. So David decides, okay, we're going to try again, guys. We're going to go back. We're going to get the ark. We're going to do it right this time, and we're going to take it back to the city. And so this time, he makes sure that the Levites are the ones who are carrying the ark. So the ones that God has specially appointed to minister in the house of God, they are the ones who are carrying the presence of God back into the city. And there's music, there's worship happening, and it's like, wow, every 6 steps that they take, they offer a sacrifice, they worship God, and then they continue another 6 steps. And they do this all the way from Obed-Edom's house back to Jerusalem. Amazing. You might be wondering though, what's happened to Obed-Edom? Like, where's he gone in the story? Well, we actually don't hear about him again until 1 Chronicles 26, so quite a few chapters later. Now, fast forward to chapter 26. By this time, King David, he's making preparations to build a permanent space, a permanent house for the ark to dwell. I mean, when he brought it back to the city initially, he had to kind of, pitch a tent, put it there for the time being. But he's now making preparations that there would be a beautiful, magnificent, permanent place for the Ark of the Covenant to dwell, the temple. And along with that, he's making preparations for who would serve and minister in the temple. Now, what's really cool when you get to 1 Chronicles 26 is it's listing out all of the people who have been assigned to serve in the house of God. So these are all Levites, all the priests. And there's all these different roles that they had. Some were worship leaders, essentially. Others were gatekeepers. And in that list of the gatekeepers, so the ones who are in charge of letting people in and out of the temple, ensuring order in the temple, we see Obed-Edom. He's in the list. And so 1 Chronicles 26, 4-8, it says, Obed-Edom also had sons. And I'm not going to try and pronounce the names because they're really difficult, but he had 8 sons. For God had blessed Obed-Edom. Obed-Edom's son Shemaiah also had sons who were leaders in their father's family because they were very capable men. Then lists some more of his family. All these were descendants of Obed-Edom. They and their sons and their relatives were capable men with the strength to do the work, descendants of Obed-Edom, 62 in all. Now, if you go through and you read some of the other lists in First Chronicles, I mean, there's a lot of lists. There's a lot of lists. But most people, that's like 12 family members are serving in the house of God. This guy had 62 members of his household who were all blessed with strength and ability to serve in the house of God. I find that amazing. So that's what we see of Obed-Edom, but I think there's a couple of principles that we can draw from his journey into serving that I want to encourage you in today. The first one is this: Obed-Edom's encounter with the presence of God changed his destiny. You know, we saw it before. In one instance, people encounter the presence of God, they mishandle it, they don't know what to do with it, they take it lightly, and there's consequences for it. But then we see in the case of Obed-Edom, a totally different story. This man's entire destiny was changed for the better. Why is that? Well, we don't actually get told exactly what it was that Obed-Edom did when the ark was in his house for those 3 months. But I think we can confidently infer this one thing. This man had a healthy fear and honor for God's presence. Not the kind of fear that David had, which drove him away from the presence of God, but the kind of healthy respect and honor and a revelation that, like I said before, this is no religious relic or object that's in my home. This is the presence of the living God. This is Almighty God. This is a holy God who I am hosting in my home, and therefore I'm going to give honor to him as he deserves. And so after that 3 months where he hosted the ark in his home, the presence of God in his home, he was never the same. You see, he tasted and he experienced for himself the goodness of God, the blessing of God in his home. And he couldn't get enough. You know, he actually ended up following the ark back to Jerusalem, and then for the rest of his life, gave his life in service to the house of God. When I think of Psalm 84, I think of Obed-Edom. I picture him almost singing this psalm, and it goes like this in Psalms 84, 1-2. How lovely is your dwelling place, Lord Almighty. My soul yearns, even faints, for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. For better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. How amazing is that? His revelation, his encounter with the presence of God changed his entire destiny, that he would now be someone who devoted himself to serving the Lord, to bringing what he had, all that he was, to serve the living God in his house. And it leads to my second point, that his love of God's presence was what qualified him to serve in the house of God. You see, to have Obed-Edom ministering in the temple is unusual. You wouldn't, if you're just reading through that list, you could easily skim over this. It's significant because you see, Obed-Edom was an outsider. He wasn't actually a Levite. He wasn't actually one who was specially appointed to serve and minister in the temple. He was not a Levite. He wasn't even an Israelite. He was a Gittite, which means he came from Gath, which is a region where the Philistines were. Like, he was an outsider, and yet God allowed him and qualified him to be a minister in the house of God. I don't know about you, but that encourages me because, so often we can come with these preconceptions that, I've got to have so much gifting, or I've got to look a certain way, or I've got to be a certain way to be able to minister and give my gifts in the house of God. Not so. Not so. What qualified him was his love for the presence of God. And that's what qualifies us. If we have a willing heart and a love for God, a love for his house, that is what qualifies us. I say that because I have seen that in my own life. You know, when I first came to Lighthouse Church, I would have been about 10 or 11 years old. And I was incredibly shy, like so shy. But I'd always had a love for the presence of God, always felt so close to God in worship. And I remember one time having like an encounter moment with God in church. And I saw the worship leader ministering, and I just got a sense of, you're meant to do that. You're meant to do that. But at the same time, I'm like, God, I have no confidence at all to be on a stage in front of people. Like, I have never sung in front of people at all. Like, what? I knew on the inside of my heart that that was what he was calling me to do and asking me to do. But in the natural, had no confidence to step out and do that. But boy, oh boy, am I thankful for leaders in my church community who saw something in me as a young girl, who encouraged me in that gifting, who made space, who prepared a place for me to be able to come, use the gifts that God had given me, and to grow in that and serve in the house of God. I'm so thankful for that. And you know, I hope that is an encouragement to you today, because I felt as I'd been praying and preparing today, that there are some people who are sitting in this room perhaps who have probably disqualified yourselves, thought, what do I have to give to God? What do I possibly have? I don't have anything to bring. I don't have anything of worth to bring before God. But let me remind you in 1 Corinthians 12 and Ephesians 4, which talks about spiritual gifts. It says in 1 Corinthians 12:7, but the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one for the profit of all. In other words, God has given each and every one of you something, a gift, something to serve others, to serve and glorify God, to build the church, to build up other people. He's given every single one of you something of worth to bring. If you're a Spirit-filled believer, you've got at least one gift to bring to him. And you need to know that you have something of value. You have something of worth. There are gifts inside of you and abilities inside of you that God has uniquely given you to be able to reach and touch other people's lives that no one else would be able to touch. And when you use those gifts that he's given you and you're operating in that, it gives glory to our God. It makes a difference in the lives of others, and you in turn get a sense of purpose in your life. And my last point is this. Obed-Edom's encounter with the presence of God brought blessing to the next generations. How cool is that? I love that. That an encounter with the presence of God and devoting my life to serving God is not just about me. The impact doesn't just stop with me. It's for the next generations. You know, we see that. It's so remarkable that it wasn't just him who served the Lord, but it was his sons, his 8 sons, then their sons, 62 of his family in total serving in the house of the Lord. How amazing. You see, a devotion to serving in the house of God, it's not just about us. It's about the legacy that we are leaving for the next generations. That those in our natural families, our kids, our children's children, they would have an opportunity to encounter God's presence like we have. That they would know and experience the love of God for themselves. That their lives and their destinies would be transformed in the house of God too. That they would have a sense of purpose and mission for their life too. That they would discover gifts and abilities that the Lord has anointed them to as well. That's what it's about. It's not for us. It's for our kids. It's for the next generations. And I love it too. It's not limited to just our natural families too. It's our spiritual family. Do you know that one of the pictures that God gives us in his word of the church is that it's the family of God? And so there are next generations of believers, yet to be born into this family. And we are preparing a way for them to come and encounter the presence of God. Every week that you show up, every week that you come at, goodness knows what time, early in the morning worship team to come and set up and rehearse. You're preparing a place for these ones to encounter the presence of God. For those of you who are in kids ministry, every time you're up there and you're preparing the lessons and the curriculum and you're making things look beautiful for the kids, you're preparing a place for our children to come and encounter the presence of God. For those of you on our stewards team who come, again, early in the morning and you're setting things up and making things beautiful and presentable, you're setting a place for others to come and encounter the presence of God. That's what we're doing when we're serving. We're preparing a place for others to encounter God like we have. How awesome is that?